Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to give you some practical guidelines and suggestions for designing awesome infographics. First, let's talk about the overall structure of your infographic. You'll want to consider your narrative arc. So first, you'll want to use some type of engaging hook to pull in your readers. And this could be through a powerful image or video or through specialized text. But whatever you choose, you want to make sure that it's really going to captivate your audience. So take a look at this example here, and this very large GIF of the cheetah running really serves as that hook to pull the readers into this infographic. Now, the middle of your arc is really like the meat or the bulk of this story. Now, this should be supported by visuals, symbols, facts, and data. And you really want to strike a balance between your visuals and your text. So you don't want it to be too image heavy. You don't want it to be too text heavy. So if you take a look at this example here on the deep web, you'll see it strikes a really good balance between images and symbols and also text while using this overarching metaphor of the iceberg and the ocean. You'll also want to make sure that you leave a lasting impression and that your piece ends with some type of powerful conclusion. So this is really where you want your readers to end up, both visually and content-wise. So if we go back to this last infographic we looked at, we really want them to sort of end up at this bottom piece. And I think this really powerful image of the octopus capturing all of the person icons, it serves as a very well-rounded conclusion. I have another example here. This is on GMOs, and you can see that we're really leading the readers through the infographic, and we do want them to end up at the bottom. So you can see this one is set up very, very vertically, and then it brings you right to the bottom, and you can see here that want to avoid GMOs, and then we have these two pieces of information, go organic, look for the seal, that really stand out at the bottom of the page in this particular infographic. Now your plot, in terms of what your infographic is about, it could be simple, it could be complex. Complex isn't always necessarily better. Think about road signs, for example, and how they convey meaning with a very clear premise that's read at, going 100 kilometers an hour. Now, your infographic probably needs to be more complex than a road sign, but still you need to leave your readers with an impression just by looking at it quickly. So that's going to lead us into the next piece. So consider the following sections as you're designing your infographic. Let's take a look at the font styles first. So typography is really just the type of font that you're choosing. And you really want to make sure that you're choosing very cohesive fonts because it's really important in your overall design. So I recommend, and there are a few exceptions, but I do recommend that your font should either be all serif or all sans serif font because combining them limits cohesiveness. So what exactly is a serif or sans serif font? Well, serif fonts have decorative flourishes at the end of the letters like this. And sans serif do not have those decorative flourishes at the end of letters, so like this. And you can see already just on this slide that interplay between the serif font and the sans serif font sort of makes things look a bit odd. Also, the fact that I have 3 different typefaces also doesn't make this piece look cohesive. So even just on this slide itself, the fact that I have 3 different fonts makes it look not quite as cohesive. So I have a really interesting infographic to show you as an example. Now, this one actually uses a combination of serif and sans serif fonts because that's the purpose of this infographic, is to sort of decide when to use one over the other. And you'll see that they're actually competing with one another, which I think speaks to the overall message of, these two fonts battling it out. But it it has that limited cohesiveness when they're not sort of blended in a nice way. And you can really see just as we sort of move through the infographic and you see the serif fonts on the right and the sans serif fonts on the left, that it doesn't really give it that cohesiveness. Now, again, this is a different type of infographic because the whole purpose is deciding between the two. So it actually works in the favor of the message of this in terms of these two battling it out and which one is better. You want to make sure that you choose appropriate fonts that are of the right size. So I do recommend sort of choosing 3 different font styles and sizes. So you can have one for your title, one for your headers, one for the body. If you do need to include full citations in your infographic, you can use them as like a 4th size of font, and they could be quite small at the bottom. One of the things with infographics is they're meant to be read online, so you can always zoom in. So you don't have to worry if when they're fully zoomed out, if it's legible, because the whole purpose is to be able to zoom sort of in and out of an infographic. Now, the title font could be a bit fancier. And that's okay, going back to that infographic with the cheetah, how it was in that script, but your body and heading font should all be quite legible. You can use more font sizes if appropriate. So after I show you an example, I'll give you some details in a moment. But here is that cheetah infographic that I had mentioned in terms of the font styles. So that it does have a bit of a fancier font just for the title, but then you can see everything else is quite consistent. So those headings are a similar size, the body is a similar size, and then there is some different sizing sort of brought in for numbers and data. So just some other things to consider. Your main title really should be the largest font. Subtitle font can be a little bit smaller. You may want to keep it the same type of font, sort of related, but it is okay if it is a little bit different. But your heading text should all be the same size throughout your infographic just to build cohesiveness. Same with your body text. It needs to be legible. It needs to be smaller than the heading text. And as we saw with that cheetah infographic, you can use other sizing for, labels or data or other elements just to draw attention as needed. And again, any small notes or full references should really be like that fine print size. So here's another example here where we have one size for the title, our headings, which in this case are that energy, thinking, life, and values styles. Those are all a different size. And then there's that body text, which is a little bit smaller. So you can see here how it's very cohesive. It's using the same type of font. So it's using the exact same font, but it's just using sizing a little bit differently. And you'll also see, while in email, people tend to not use all caps because it's considered like yelling, in an infographic, you can certainly use all caps as headings, and it's quite common to do so. Let's now move into color. So you want to use simple color combinations to really keep them cohesive. You can use your colors to convey meaning, sort of like how a stop sign is, very bold red, but you also want to use other things like tints, tones, and shades, and a color wheel can help you with your color selection. So you can go with a monochromatic theme where you have just different tints and shades of the same color. So a tint is a color in which white is added, so it's a little bit lighter. A shade is a color in which black is added, which makes it a little bit darker. You can choose analogous colors on the color wheel, so colors that sit next to each other. So for example, here we have red, orange, and yellow. You can choose complementary colors. So in this example, we have black as a base, and then purple and yellow are across each other on the color wheel, so they are complementary colors. You may want to consider, if you're using multiple colors, that they all have the same hue or similar intensity. So you can see here, while we have 3 distinct different colors, we have this pink, this blue, and then this green. They're all of the same intensity. Other options for infographics could be just using neutral colors with then a highlighted color sort of added in. Sometimes we have maybe two different highlighting colors just based on the purpose and intention that goes with the infographic. And then here again, we just have colors of similar intensity. These are all tints. So these are all those exact three same colors that are in the box above, but white was added to all of them, so they're all a little bit lighter. Here in this infographic, you can see we're using a lot of neutrals. So we have the blacks, grays, and whites, and then we have these two different colors. So we have blue sort of as a base, and then yellow as being like that highlighting color. And in most places in this infographic, it works well. The only place where it doesn't work quite so well is that bottom right-hand corner, just because the yellow on top of the blue is a little bit hard to see. Here's another example of a mostly neutral base. So you can see most of the color is black and gray, which gives you that neutral color. And then it has two different highlighting colors. So it has orange to sort of bring everything together. And then it has yellow to highlight certain bits of information and facts. You can see how color is sort of used there. Going back to this infographic here, you can see how it's mostly blues, but then we have a trio of analogous colors, so red, yellows, and oranges that are kind of used together as highlighting colors. So there are different ways that you can sort of play with the colors, but you do want to make sure that they are all integrated and that they're all building cohesiveness within the piece. You can use color to convey meaning, and if you're going down this route, it should be really clear to readers what meaning your colors convey. So one thing you can do is just sort of zoom out and look at your piece in full and just focus on the colors and how do they contribute to the overall sort of meaning and design of your piece. Now this one is quite simple because each of the colors represent a different personality type. So you can see here that each of those colors have an aligning meaning and they're all placed there very, very intentionally. But if we're going back to a different example, the one where we had the orange and yellow, all of those were meant to draw your eye to important, the yellow is meant to draw your eye to important facts and data. So just be mindful of how you're using color and what you choose to highlight. Next, we're going to talk about design and flow. So you really want to make a very solid, eye-catching design overall in your piece. You really want to think about what is the storyline for your infographic? How do you want your story to flow from beginning to end? So often it's a good idea to just sketch out a rough layout, either on paper or digitally, even before you start the infographic, and play with different designs and think about how you want to lay out your information, how you want your readers' eyes to move across the infographic. And it really needs to be obvious how to follow it. They should really know quite easily where do they start, where do they end as appropriate. So let's take a look at this infographic on Alice in Wonderland. It is quite eye-catching and engaging. My only problem with this is that for me, it's a little bit difficult to see sort of where to start. So I tend to start up here with Alice, and then I would follow her down. And then I see we've got this sign sort of pointing this way. So then I'm moving around here. And then I sort of move back up and then around to here. But the problem with this is if you look at this theme, this text here is really meant to be where you're supposed to start. So for me, I'm not reading the title, sort of moving down and then going left to right. I'm kind of starting here and moving around this way. And even if you, let's say, start here and you do move down and then you sort of move to self-reliance, this is sort of a bit of an ending because it talks about the lessons that she's learned at the end of the novel. So it really seems like you need to start with growing up, then move to rules, then move to self-reliance. So I would just recommend to the author of this particular infographic just restructuring it a little bit so it's a little bit more predictable on where you're supposed to start and where you're supposed to end up. If you take a look at this one, now this particular infographic doesn't necessarily have a starting place or an ending place. Your eye is drawn to this Earth observation satellites. But with this one, it's a little bit less important because you can start really at any satellite and then move around. So regardless of where your eye starts, whether you start, here at this light green one or whether you start down here at this red one, your eye will just naturally move either clockwise or counterclockwise, and you'll get all the way around and back to the start. So while this one offers a little bit more choice, it's actually quite nice in the sense that it's easy to follow, even though it doesn't necessarily matter where you're starting or where you're ending in this particular example. Now, some infographics are set up vertically, more in sort of a portrait mode, and are designed to be read top to bottom. Other infographics are set up horizontally in more of a landscape mode, designed to be read across the page. You can also just have some that are, a square shape and aren't either vertical or horizontal, but regardless of the orientation, the way that you can present the content can either be quite linear or you can have it sort of snake and move around the page. So if you take a look at this infographic here, so I have it zoomed out in full on the left, and then I'm slowly scrolling through it now, just so you can see. This does use a variety of colors because that is the intention of this particular piece, but this is very clearly meant to be read from top to bottom. So you sort of start at the title on color, you move into red, and then you move through the piece. Now, I think this is set up quite well. The only piece that's a little bit difficult is that yellow text is not easy to read on the gray background. So I would recommend just making sure that your colors are easy to read, because that will impact how your readers are gaining information from the infographic if it is difficult to read. So you'll see this one is really just a one-page infographic, but this one, it's a little bit difficult to sort of see where you're supposed to go, just because the numbers are so small. It does have numbers. We've got like number 1 here, and then you need to move to 2, 3, 4. We have 5 here. We also have 5 here, and then we move down to 6. So this one is sort of an overall one-page infographic with different numbers identifying where you're supposed to move across the page. This one here is more horizontal. You're meant to start along the left, read across, and then you can move down to this section and then read across. You'll want to really make use of negative space in your infographic, and very often infographics that try to fill all available negative space can make it really difficult to follow and also a bit overwhelming. So try to strike a balance between that negative space, so that sort of empty or blank space, and then your positive space that has the text, images, etc. And it can be helpful to just sort of zoom out and look at the piece as a whole to see how you've used that negative space. So if you take a look at this infographic, for example, there are elements of negative space sort of integrated within, so it doesn't seem too crowded. There are a few places, particularly here with number 1, where I feel like the text comes a little bit too close to the line, so I would have liked to have seen maybe the text would be a little bit longer, start up perhaps a little higher, just to leave a little more space around it. But you'll see there is a good amount of space within this. Moving back to this infographic, you'll see here again, there still is some negative space. I think there still also is a little bit of room for improvement, because in some areas it does look a bit crowded. And I think that just by sort of altering size of the font, or perhaps making some of those sections a bit more concise, would help. This one here has quite a bit of negative space. There's not a lot of text content, so that makes it a little bit easier. But you can see how this one here has a lot of negative space within it. This one here with spaceships, so you can see there is some negative space. The text is sort of chunked in areas. Again, I think I would like to see just a little bit more sort of negative space as you move through, but still overall not bad. Now, you'll want to be very careful about the images and symbols that you consider in your piece because those elements are really quite key. So you want to be very careful in terms of the design and look of them because you want your piece to look cohesive. So you really want to choose those images and symbols that have the same look and feel and really pay attention to how your visual elements work together, both with the text and the overall design. Now you want to really make sure that you are not using pixelated images, watermarked images, or those that are of really low quality, because those will detract from your overall piece. So you want to make sure that everything is quite clear. If you take a look at this, so this uses very basic symbols and colors to represent particular content, but everything looks very, very cohesive, sort of shape-wise within this particular piece. You may also find it helpful to add arrows or some other types of elements, perhaps numbering, to help readers determine how their eye is going to scan across the piece. So when you're looking at it, what path do your eyes naturally take? And is this the path that you want your readers to take? So sort of zooming out, seeing where your eyes will sort of go, and then determining, do I want my readers to follow in the way that I have it laid out. So thinking back to that Alice in Wonderland example, my eyes didn't follow the way that the reader wanted me to go. So what are different elements that could have been added? We could add arrows, we could add numbers, we could add lines, we could add other visual cues and things to sort of help guide the reader. Now that is very important in this infographic just because it's really hard to determine where you're going to start and where you're going to end. But as I mentioned earlier, the numbers are so small that you really have to zoom in to see where to start. So I would have made the numbers quite large in this piece. Another thing that I would recommend is you don't want to duplicate numbers. So there is a number 5 here, and then there's also a number 5 here. So really this should be 5, this should be 6, and then this should be 7 instead of 5, 5, 6, because it makes it a little bit confusing when you're trying to hunt for the numbers. And when I was looking at this infographic to begin with, I found the 5, I moved right to the 6, and I completely ignored the fact that there was another 5 here. So you really want to make sure that your numbering is appropriate. Let's take a look at this example here from earlier. So you can see here, this is talking about why freeways come to a stop. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the flow that the reader wants you to take, but it also has a second meaning because each piece of information here moves and links to a number here. So as you're reading about what happens first, you then are treated to the visual in the graphic. Now, the one thing that I would just sort of add just as an extra is perhaps a color to the numbers, just because when you see that the number 2 is here and you're trying to find the other number that corresponds with it, sometimes it can be tricky. So if this, perhaps the one were in yellow and then this one were in yellow, it would help join your eyes together so you can see that you're going to see the 2 here and it's going to link to the text here. You'll see this text here doesn't have any numbers because this is just additional to the information that you see within the piece. And we're going back to this spaceship example. So this one has quite large numbers to make it easy to follow, and you can see that was done because if you were to just start and let's say there were no numbers here, I would begin with this title. I'd probably move over here and read this, and then let's say I'd move down here, I'd move across, I'd move here to 4, but instead of going to 5, my eyes naturally want to move down to 7, 8, 9, 10, and then up to 6, and then up to 5. So if there were no numbers here, this is the path I would take. But by having the numbers here, I can see that the intention is I want to go 1, 2, 3, 4, move over here to 5, 6, 7, and then 8, 9, 10. Even still, I would consider reworking the way the flow goes just within this piece, just to make it a little bit easier. But having these very large numbers in an accent color does make it easy for me to know where to go, which is quite different than the previous example where the numbers were very small. This example here, you can see they actually use arrows to identify where you need to go. So it sort of draws your eye. So you know, okay, I'm moving down here next. Next, I'm going to read this green text in the bubble, and then I've got the little arrow pointing to the right. So this one does a really good job of adding arrows to sort of guide the way that you read around the page. Overall, think about your infographic as a work of art and just have fun with it. Make it something that you're proud of sharing and think about it as something that you want others to share. But most importantly of all, you want to have fun. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you have learned some useful information on creating your own infographic.